The apartment wasn't remarkable. 2 rooms, 1 window that looked out onto a narrow residential street. But to Daniel, it felt like relief. After the months of court hearings, the quiet arguments with his ex-wife, and the sound of doors closing too firmly, this small place promised stillness. He moved in during late autumn when the trees along the street had already surrendered their leaves. The air was cool, the light dim even at noon. It suited him. He told himself the muted colors of the neighborhood would help him think clearly again. His first evening there, he sat at the window with a mug of coffee that had gone cold. Across the street stood a row of small townhouses, nearly identical in shape, each with a front porch, a trimmed hedge, and curtains drawn against the dusk. All except one. The house directly opposite his window had its curtains open, and through the faint reflection of the glass he could see the living room. A woman stood near a lamp, folding laundry on a small table. She looked to be in her late 40s, maybe early 50s, moving slowly but with a kind of practiced rhythm. Each item she folded she stacked neatly, then turned slightly toward the sofa before returning to the pile. The television glowed softly but without sound. Daniel watched without meaning to. The calmness of her movement felt hypnotic. After a few minutes, he caught himself staring and looked away. Over the next week, his routine settled. Mornings he worked from home, typing reports for a logistics firm that rarely called. Afternoons he walked to the corner store, then returned and ate alone. In the evenings he sat by the window. Sometimes he read. More often he looked across the street. The woman's routine didn't change. She appeared every night around the same time, usually between 7 and 8. Always folding clothes, sometimes dusting the bookshelf, occasionally sitting by the window with a cup of tea. Her curtains stayed open, her lamp stayed on. He began to think she might prefer being seen. Once he saw a man visit, a younger man, perhaps her son. They talked briefly in the doorway, the kind of conversation one has when words are kept short to avoid saying the wrong thing. Then he left, and the woman remained standing there for several minutes, her face unreadable. Daniel noticed details. The way she smoothed her skirt before sitting down. The way her head tilted slightly to one side when she listened to the muted television. These gestures began to map themselves into his memory. It wasn't infatuation. It was more like fascination. The quiet study of another life from a distance. At night, he sometimes heard faint sounds from the street. The wind rattling branches, the distant bark of a dog. But the house across the street was silent. Even when her window was lit, even when he saw her move, no sound carried across. The quiet began to feel deliberate, almost staged. On his 10th night in the apartment, he awoke at 3 a.m. and went to the kitchen for water. The street was empty, the lamplight thin and pale. Out of habit, he looked across. The woman's window was still lit. She was standing motionless near the curtain, her hand resting on the fabric as if about to close it. But she didn't. She stood there, facing the street, unmoving. Daniel watched for nearly a minute. Then, finally, she turned off the lamp. The room vanished into darkness, and her reflection disappeared with it. He went back to bed but didn't sleep easily. The next morning, he tried not to think about it. It was none of his business, he told himself. People have their habits. Maybe she couldn't sleep. Maybe she'd simply been thinking. But the image of her standing there, frozen in the light, stayed with him. The stillness of it, the sense that she was waiting for something he couldn't see. That evening, when he sat by the window again, the curtains were open as usual. She was there, folding laundry in the lamplight, as if nothing at all had changed. By mid-November, Daniel's evenings had taken on a ritual quality. Work, dinner, window. The rhythm suited him, a kind of silent companionship across the street. He no longer questioned why the woman's open curtains comforted him. It was simply part of the view, a light left on in an otherwise dim world. He noticed she always started her chores at the same time, precisely 7:15 p.m. The lamp switched on, a faint silhouette appeared, and the slow rhythm of her movements began. Folding, adjusting, standing still for a moment as if recalling something, then continuing. It wasn't the kind of observation he was proud of. He sometimes told himself he was just studying the neighborhood, noticing its life, its quiet. But he knew that wasn't true. The woman, with her unwavering schedule and gentle movements, drew him in. She was predictable, and in that predictability, he found calm. Still, there were details that unsettled him once he began to notice them. Every few nights, she would stop mid-motion and stand near the center of the room. Her head would tilt slightly toward the right wall, where a narrow doorway led to another part of the house. She would stay that way for several seconds, listening, maybe, then resume what she was doing. Daniel could never see what, if anything, drew her attention. One evening, he saw her mouth move as if speaking, though she was alone. He told himself she might be on the phone or talking to herself. People did that, but the idea stayed with him. Later that week, a new element entered the pattern. A small, white dog began appearing at her side, sitting by the armchair near the window. Daniel hadn't seen it before. The animal would remain there motionless while she worked. Then, on 2 occasions, Daniel saw her reach down to pet it, though from that distance, in the dim light, he couldn't tell if her hand actually made contact. It was strange, the things one could notice from across the street. One Friday evening, a cold front swept through the city. Wind rattled the window frames, and the street lamp flickered. Daniel closed his curtains halfway, but curiosity won. He peeked out again. Her curtains were still open, though the wind tugged at them from the edges. She was sitting at the table this time, eating alone. Her posture was rigid, her gaze fixed not on the plate, but on something beyond it, perhaps the blank wall opposite her. At 7:53, she stood and crossed to the window. Her eyes flicked briefly toward Daniel's building, then down to the street. For the first time, he felt exposed, as if she might have sensed him watching. He froze, then stepped quietly back from the window. When he returned a minute later, she had turned away. The next night, she didn't appear at all. Daniel sat at his window until after 10, waiting for the lamp to glow, but the house across the street remained dark. The absence of light made the street feel unfamiliar, as though something essential had gone missing. He tried to focus on a book, but found himself glancing up every few minutes, expecting to see her silhouette. On the 3rd night without her light, he began to wonder if she'd gone somewhere. The younger man, her son perhaps, hadn't appeared either. By the 4th night, worry had replaced curiosity. He caught himself walking across the street under the pretext of taking out the trash just to glance at her windows. The curtains were still open, but the room beyond was completely dark. A faint layer of dust had gathered along the sill, visible only when the streetlight flickered. That image stayed with him, the stillness of the house, the sense of suspended motion. The following morning, he asked the woman at the corner store if she knew who lived in the house across the street. "The Harrisons," she said after a moment's thought. "But Mrs. Harrison passed last year. Her son comes by sometimes, I think. Keeps the place tidy." Daniel blinked. "Passed?" The shopkeeper nodded. "Heart failure, poor thing. House hasn't sold yet, but I see lights on sometimes. Guess he checks in." Daniel stood there, silent for a moment, the sound of the refrigerator humming behind him. He thanked her, paid for his coffee, and left. That night, the lamp across the street was lit again, and Mrs. Harrison, or the woman he thought was Mrs. Harrison, was back at the table, folding clothes. The light returned to the house across the street as if it had never gone dark. Daniel sat frozen in his chair for several minutes before convincing himself there must be an explanation. The shopkeeper was mistaken, or perhaps someone else now lived there. Still, the shape of the woman, the rhythm of her movements, even the pale cardigan she wore, all were the same. He tried to rationalize. People misremember things. Maybe the woman he'd seen before wasn't Mrs. Harrison at all, but a relative or tenant. He almost managed to believe it until she turned slightly toward the window, and the light caught her face. It was her. He felt his stomach tighten. The details were unmistakable. The same narrow eyes, the faint gray streak along the right temple, the same habit of touching the side of her neck when she paused. The rest of that evening unfolded like a ritual he couldn't escape. He told himself to look away, to stop watching, but something in the stillness across the street drew him back each time. The scene never varied. She folded, paused, adjusted the lamp, turned toward the window, then continued. By the third night of her return, Daniel's thoughts had grown restless. He began recording the view on his phone, telling himself it was just curiosity, documentation. The footage showed nothing unusual, just a woman going about her routine. But he kept filming anyway, zooming slightly closer each time. He played one clip frame by frame. At first, everything looked normal. Then, in a single frame, her head turned, directly toward the camera. He froze the image there. Her expression was blank, but her eyes, slightly unfocused, appeared to meet his. He closed the video. He deleted it. But later that night, he filmed again. A pattern began to take shape in his notes. The woman's movements, though repetitive, seemed to follow a rhythm. Roughly 27 minutes between the start of her folding and the moment she stopped and stared toward the right-hand doorway. He tracked this over several nights, and it held with uncanny precision. Something deliberate was happening, though he couldn't say what. The following Sunday, while walking to the corner store, he saw the younger man again, the same one who'd visited her weeks earlier. He was locking the front door of her house, wearing work gloves and carrying a small cardboard box. Daniel hesitated, then crossed the street. "Excuse me," he said carefully. Do you live here?" The man looked up, wary. "No, just cleaning up. My mother's house." "Mrs. Harrison?" The man nodded, adjusting his grip on the box. "Yeah, she passed last winter." Daniel felt his mouth go dry. "Right. I'm sorry. I thought I've seen someone there lately. I assumed maybe." The man's brow furrowed. "Someone there?" "Yes. Lights on at night. A woman, maybe around 50, looks..." He hesitated. "Looks like her?" For a moment, neither spoke. Then the man shook his head slightly. "That's not possible. There's no power. The line's been shut off since May." He gave a polite, uncomfortable nod and walked toward his car. Daniel stood in the street, unable to move. That night, he didn't open his curtains. He tried to work, to read, but his mind kept circling back. When midnight came, he gave in. He crossed the room and with one careful motion, pulled the curtain aside. The lamp was on, the same soft yellow glow spilling across the floor. The woman was there, folding, pausing, listening to the silence. His chest tightened. He felt both fear and a strange, reluctant comfort, like seeing a ghost one has grown used to living with. He watched until his eyes blurred, and as the clock passed 1 a.m., she stopped moving and turned slowly toward the window. This time, her eyes weren't unfocused. She was looking directly at him. For several seconds, neither moved. Then, as if some invisible signal had passed between them, she raised her hand. a small, almost casual gesture, and drew the curtains closed. The street went dark. Daniel didn't open his curtains for 2 days. He told himself he needed distance, that he had been projecting his own isolation onto the woman across the street. He worked, he cleaned, he even called his ex-wife once, though their conversation dissolved into small talk and static silence. But every night, when the air cooled and the street outside grew quiet, the thought returned. What if she's there again? On the third evening, he gave in. The sky was heavy with low clouds, the kind that seemed to mute the world. He stood by the window, hand on the curtain edge, heart unreasonably fast. He pulled it back. Darkness. No light from the house across the street. He felt both relief and disappointment. For a long time, he just stared at the still outline of her window. Then, near the base of the front door, something caught his eye. A faint metallic glint. The door was slightly ajar. He stood there for a long moment before moving. By the time he crossed the street, the air had cooled further. The porch steps creaked under his weight. He told himself he was only checking, making sure everything was all right. Nothing more. He knocked once, no answer. The door, unlatched, opened halfway. The smell that met him wasn't rot or dust. It was detergent, faint and clean. The kind of scent that lingers in homes long after anyone lives there. Hello? His voice felt too loud. The living room looked smaller from inside. The lamp he'd seen for weeks was there on the side table, unplugged. The cord coiled neatly behind it. Dust covered the shade. On the coffee table sat a folded pile of clothes, untouched, gray with time. He stepped closer, heart pounding. Every detail matched what he'd watched from his own window. The arrangement of furniture, the position of the armchair, even the half-folded shirt resting atop the stack. It was as though the scene had been left mid-action and sealed away. He turned toward the hallway where she'd always paused. The doorway was narrow, leading to a darker corridor. He hesitated, then called again. No sound. He moved forward, one step at a time, until he reached the small bedroom at the end. The bed was made, the walls bare except for a framed photo on the nightstand. He leaned closer. It showed a woman, the same woman, smiling beside a teenage boy, sunlight behind them. The frame was dusty, but the glass was clean, as though recently wiped. A noise startled him, faint, distant from outside. He turned quickly and saw movement through the open front door, the younger man walking up the steps, box in hand. The man froze when he saw Daniel inside. "What are you doing here?" I saw the door open. I thought maybe..." The man's voice hardened. "You can't be in here." He set the box down, breathing unevenly. "This is private property." "I'm sorry," Daniel said quickly. I saw lights. A woman here at night, folding clothes." The younger man stared at him. "What?" "I've seen her for weeks, every night, same time. I thought she might need help." The man's expression shifted, not anger, but confusion tinged with pity. "Sir, there hasn't been power in this house for months. No one's lived here since she passed. The curtains were closed when I locked up last week." He stepped past Daniel and glanced around, confirming what he already knew. "You need to go?" Daniel nodded, backing toward the door. His mind reeled. The light, the movement, the way she'd looked directly at him. None of it made sense. Outside, the air felt sharper. He crossed back to his own apartment and sat by his window again, staring at the darkened house. The man locked the door, turned off his flashlight, and left. The street fell silent. For the first time, Daniel considered the possibility that the woman, her image, her gestures, had come from him. The routine he'd imagined might have been his own reflection of loss, shaped by the light, by memory, by the need to see someone steady and familiar through the glass. He sat there for hours, watching the house dissolve into shadow. His phone buzzed once, a work message he ignored. At 2:17 a.m., movement flickered in the window across the street. A trick of light, he told himself, nothing more. Still, when the faint outline of a woman's figure appeared again, just standing there, still as glass, he didn't move. He simply watched, breath shallow, until the lamp that shouldn't have worked glowed softly once more. In the following weeks, Daniel avoided looking out the window. He told himself that ignoring the house was an act of recovery, that normal people didn't track the patterns of other people's lamps. He went for runs, forced conversations at work, and even tried dating again. But each night, as he returned to his apartment and set his keys on the counter, the silence across the street drew him back like gravity. Sometimes he imagined that he could hear a faint hum, appliances, a television left on. But whenever he opened his window, the sound was gone. The house remained dark most evenings. Yet he could never quite shake the feeling that something in its walls was still listening. He considered calling the son, explaining himself, offering to help with the property. But what could he possibly say? "I've been watching your mother's ghost, though I don't believe in ghosts." There was no sentence that didn't sound mad, so he stayed quiet. Then, one afternoon, a for sale sign appeared on the lawn. By evening, the porch light was on, a warm, new bulb, and through the window he saw a real estate agent adjusting blinds, taking photos, moving through the space with casual professionalism. For a moment, Daniel almost laughed. It felt like proof that the world still obeyed rules, that nothing supernatural had ever happened. But the laughter never quite came. A young couple bought the house 2 months later. They painted the front door pale blue and hung wind chimes on the porch. The first night they slept there, Daniel caught himself standing at his own window again, watching their silhouettes move through rooms that no longer belonged to Mrs. Harrison. At 7:15 p.m., the hour that had once governed his evenings, he turned away. Spring came. Daniel began sleeping better, even leaving the blinds open during the day. On weekends, he met friends for coffee. Yet something had shifted in him, a quiet awareness of how easily perception could bend, how loneliness could turn observation into invention. Sometimes he revisited the recordings he hadn't deleted. They were ordinary, static grain, the faint outline of a window. He would pause them, searching for any flicker that might explain what he'd seen, but the images revealed nothing except the reflection of his own apartment lights. In one frame, barely visible, he noticed himself in the glass, an indistinct figure seated at a window, camera in hand. He realized that in her position, looking across the street, he must have appeared the same way, a solitary shape framed by light. Maybe that was the truth of it. 2 windows, 2 watchers, each projecting some version of the other. The thought unsettled him more than any apparition. Late one night in early summer, wind rustled through the open windows. Daniel lay half awake, the city quiet except for the distant rhythm of a train. When the chime from across the street sounded, a light metallic trill, he rolled over instinctively, eyes half open. The new owners had gone on vacation. Their car was gone, the house dark, but the sound of the chime was clear, gentle, rhythmic. He stood, walked to the window. The porch swayed slightly in the wind. Everything looked ordinary, harmless. Then he saw it. A faint glow from deeper inside, not bright enough to define, but enough to outline. The shape of the lamp. The same lamp. For a long time, he stood motionless. He could feel the familiar tightening in his chest, that instinctive mix of dread and recognition. Part of him wanted to run outside, to cross the street again, to touch the wall and prove that it was just light, just reflection. But he didn't move. He thought of the detergent smell, the folded laundry left gray with dust, the photograph wiped clean though the rest of the frame had been forgotten. He thought of how memory clings to surfaces, how a house can replay its own silence through whoever happens to be watching. Maybe he had created her. Maybe she had created him. Maybe loneliness, given shape by light, didn't need to belong to anyone. He closed the curtain slowly, leaving only a thin line open. Through it, the glow still pulsed faintly, steady, patient, as if waiting for acknowledgement. Daniel turned off his own lamp, sat in the dark, and listened to the wind move between the houses. For the first time, he didn't try to decide what was real. He simply let the two windows face each other across the street, and in the thin space between their lights, the quiet felt almost human.